All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're starting a new series. All the videos that I've made so far have been very focused on Scala macros and from sort of easy mode of how you can easily auto-derive type classes using raw macros instead of mirrors, all the way to more advanced things like actually diving into trees and all that fun stuff. And I realized that that's not super applicable to the everyday tasks that we do. So what I've been working on is just a bunch of different projects that leverage those macros in order to do some fun things, but are just more applicable to everyday tasks that we as Scala developers work on. So what are these things? This is threefold. So there's the database, the HTTP server, and the front end. And I know that for a lot of people, the front end's probably not as applicable, but the kind of goal of this whole ecosystem, I guess you could say, that I'm going to be talking about is that as a sort of solo developer, you can kind of just have an idea and be able to create the whole thing yourself. And do it pretty easily with as minimal boilerplate and things just working the first try. That's the vision. So what are the three guiding principles or frustrations that have fueled this that I've created are, first of all, compatibility issues. For example, and I'm going to try and not go off the rails here. I practiced for this video and I end up going on an hour-long rant of all the different things that are incompatible, and it frustrates me. So I'm just going to keep the example simple. Doobie and Zio. So Doobie is a type level library and Zio is a Zio library, obviously. And in order to get Doobie and Zio to work together properly, you have to have three libraries. You have to have Doobie, you have to have Zio, and then you have to have like a Doobie Zio compat layer. And it works, but it's not ideal in my opinion. Like I can't have typed errors, which I'm used to having in Zio. I can't even log in the middle of a database transaction because it's a connection IO. You can technically do that. Like you can download a fourth library, which is a wrapper around those three libraries, which then lets you take the connection IO out of a connection IO into like a sort of Zio or like a RIO with connection A. And it's just too much in my opinion. I could go on and on with examples that work like this, but it's just too much, and there's too much incompatibility. And then you go to something like the web server, and you're using Zio JSON, but you have a tapier schema, and those are out of sync, and the list goes on. So number one, things should be like compatible and cohesive with each other. Number two, there should be as minimal boilerplate as possible. So there's two schools of thought on things like HTTP APIs. There's sort of code to spec and spec to code. I personally take a very heavy code to spec approach because you can do that all using macros, which I'm obviously very into. And so for me, I want to define a Scala case class and just figure out what that means to the database and just have the database work properly with my Scala case class. I want to define a Scala case class or a Scala function and just have that work over HTTP. I want to define a Scala case class and just figure out what that means to a UI element. And just have that consistent across the whole thing, that you're used to, like, I define my case class and I'm able to auto-derive this thing based on it. I think it's a very nice pattern, and when you can do it across the whole stack, it ends up being very nice. So that's number two. And then number three is I want things to just work the first try. And that is sort of twofold. One is just being based on functional programming principles. Uh, Ever since I started using functional programming, I've noticed that a lot of times things just work first try once you're used to writing things that way. And I want that to work across the whole stack. And then second is not just having gotchas relating to these incompatibilities that I just talked about. I don't want to write this whole thing and then everything just works in my tests, and then I run my integration tests and I realized I accidentally used the wrong not null in my flyway script, or I forgot to add a flyway script entirely, which I've done. Um, if it compiles, it should work. That's my opinion. So those are the three guiding principles, and the sort of full stack as it is right now is database to HTTP to front end, and eventually I'm going to make it add a fourth layer, which is more of a kind of DevOps orchestration sort of Terraform-esque thing that you can use in Scala that will play nicely with your configs, and you have a type for your configs. If I have to write a config.yaml and then port that to a Go template and then port that to an application.conf and then port that to my Scala case class one more time, like, I'm gonna go insane. And I think we're all just used to doing that, but I think we can do so much better. So eventually I'll get there, but for now we only have the three: database, HTTP, front end. And so this series is going to be all about the sort of ecosystem that I've started, and I've been able to get some pretty nice examples off the ground using that. It definitely needs to be hardened up. I'm not going to like paint some rainbows that's not the case. It's definitely very fresh. But I think that there's some really cool stuff that could be done there. And so I'm excited to share it with y'all. So stay tuned.